Do you sometimes feel like you are teaching and teaching and teaching all day and the kids are just not learning? Do you feel like you put in a ton of time and effort and your results are still mediocre or bad even? Good results can be planned and predictable. You just have to put into practice some very effective teaching habits. Here are 10. Okay, this is part 3 of building rigor in your classroom, and this is the grand poobah of all of them because there are 10 strategies for effective teaching for high-risk learners, which is going to help your delivery, and I'll try to get through them as quickly as possible, but I'm going to go ahead and run through the 10 of them. I can do a more detailed video later on any of them. So here are 10 habits that are very effective. If you build them into your lessons, you will become more effective and you will raise the rigor of your classroom. Okay, number 1 is to choose a single skill to focus on for every lesson. Okay, you've got to choose your skill, you got to write that objective up there so everybody can see it, and you have to have a very clear understanding of how that skill connects to your overall goal. How is that goal going to get me to the performance level that we need at the end of the year? You need to know for sure where this skill falls in the whole continuum of learning. Okay, if they're trying to comprehend difficult text, how is theme important to that? How does that fit in? Does it fit in with only fiction or is it with information? So where does that skill fit in with the long continuum? Because remember, you've always got your eye on that main goal, the end of the year goal, so make sure that skill has a clear connection of how it's going to get you there. Make sure you have a very firm understanding of that so that every piece of the lesson and every moment you spend with the kids on that lesson is going to be effective. Number 2. Write that objective on your wall somewhere. Write it up there, get it in the corner. Don't put it on a slide and then you're going to skip through the slide and they're never going to see it again. It needs to be up on your wall in a permanent spot so everybody knows where to find it. So if you forget what's the focus, just lock eyes with that objective from across the room to refocus yourself on what's really important here. If kids are struggling, but it doesn't have to do with that objective, skip it and move on and make sure you're focused on the things that are going to get them successful on mastering that objective. Okay, after you read the objective with the students, make sure the students are also able to articulate what the objective is in their own words. So everybody turn to your neighbor and tell them, what are we going to be learning today? They turn, they talk, they say what it is. If there's any difficult vocabulary in that objective, talk about it at the beginning. Don't spend a long time on it, but just make sure you do it at the outset of every lesson so that everybody's focused, everybody knows what we're here to learn about today. Okay, the third effective strategy or practice is teach to the top. Teach to the top. This took me many, many years to figure out. You'll quickly find out if you're teaching to the left, you're waiting for everyone in your room to understand and everyone to be able to do what you're doing and follow along with you. Nobody's lost, and you're just waiting for every kid to open the book and every kid to be on the page and every kid to understand. You're not going to get very far because you're going to move at the pace of the slowest kid in your room. And that's not good. You're never going to meet your high goal if you're moving at the pace of the slowest student in your room. And the reason, I'm not saying that those kids are slow, but they will be as slow as they want to be, and you have to at some point move on. And if you teach to the middle of your class, then you've got kids at the top who are bored, and you've got kids at the bottom who are still confused, even if you're at the middle. So it's finally when I figured out. So then I would teach to the middle. And then I would wonder, I wouldn't have all the mastery or the advanced performance that we would need to get at the end of the year. And I was like, okay, well, it's because I was teaching here and they were higher, maybe they were bored. So I finally figured out, after a lot of years, that I really needed to focus on the top. I mean, you're teaching the highest level of kids. When you're doing whole group lessons, you're focused on those high kids. Make sure those high kids are engaged with you. Of course, everyone needs to be engaged. But, don't lose sleep if there's a few kids that are confused as you move on with the lesson. You're going to come to them later. They're going to be on your monitoring pathway and things like that. But you've got to make sure that those top learners, because if that's where you're teaching to the top, you can move on with the lessons in an advanced way. You're going to go back and catch the others as you in your scaffolding and in your small group instruction, maybe your tier 2, tier 3, but you don't want to dumb down the level of the class and the level of rigor just to kind of catch in those lower kids, because then you're going to lose the top. And if you lose the top, not only are those kids not getting the growth that you need, but it's going to mess up that balance. You're going to have everybody scoring low and medium, And even though some kids were capable of getting higher, they're never going to score higher if you didn't teach them the concepts and you didn't teach them the skills. You didn't go that high. So you at least need to you're exposing everyone, but you are teaching to the top of your class. Number 4, you need to use explicit teaching with high-risk learners. That means everything needs to be step by step, give them strategies, break it down, okay? If you are trying to teach a third-person point of view, for example, you might have to first teach them what are first person and third person pronouns. What does that even mean? They might have to, you can't just ask them, oh, who's the speaker? Or, you have to teach them to circle pronouns. Oh, that says she, he, and it. Those are third person pronouns. Are there any first person, any I, me, my in there? No? Okay. So it's not enough to just have the conversation. You need to give them a strategy. They need to see the paper. They need to be circling the pronouns. Step by step, very explicit instructions. Yes, you're teaching to the top, but you're giving everybody a chance to be hands-on with that and to have they have a system, a strategy for doing it. Number 5, you need to build in some kind of spiral in your instruction. Math is usually, I've seen they've been doing that for a lot of years. They have a spiral, maybe it's a do now, where you kind of hit on several of the topics that you've taught over the year, then every day you review another different set, or you do the everyday counts or calendar math, they're reviewing all those math skills every day on a little system. Reading can be a little more tricky, I thought, because there's a whole lot of skills that if you're not on that genre, maybe you're not reviewing it. But there are ways to spiral reading. You can have a strategy where you always do certain annotations on stories. Just reading itself is a spiral. So whenever you have the students reading independently, they're spiraling all of their skills because they're reading and comprehending right there. But there are several things you can do to spiral reading. That's a whole nother video. But make sure you build in a spiral, because otherwise what happens, what I used to do is I would teach all of the skills, all of the reading comprehension skills and everything the first semester. So we'd be doing this unit, and we taught these things. The kids got it. They even did okay on the test. But what would happen is, by next semester or after we passed the next unit, they had no idea what that meant anymore. Metaphor, what is that? And like, oh yeah, I kind of remember because we did that 6 weeks ago. And so what would happen is I would teach all of those things according to, the schedule the first semester, and then second semester I'd have to go back and reteach everything again, kind of really quick. I thought I was reminding them, but I was really kind of reteaching it. I was just reteaching it really fast. They understood it, but did they really learn it? Learning means you have internalized it, and in a couple of weeks you can do it again, you can apply it again. In a couple of months you can still apply it. That is learning. If they don't remember it and they don't know how to do it 2 months later, they just kind of temporarily learned it. They just kind of did it for a while. They kind of understood it enough to get past that test, and then they forgot it. And we all know, we've all done that, which is cramming, right? So it's very important to spiral your instruction. And then when I started doing that, not only did I not have to reteach everything second semester, but the scores were much higher because they continued. They kept practicing the skill. They kept practicing, and they were even better second semester because it never had to go into deep storage. It was just always there on recall. So build a spiral no matter what subject you teach or what grade. Number 6 is differentiate. At some point, you're going to have to differentiate instruction. If you're a new teacher, I know it's harder, but differentiation, that's how you get the kids. So you're teaching to the top, and then how do you get those kids who just kind of got lost in there somewhere possibly? Hopefully you will have a way to address that during your delivery, your tier 1 instruction. But if not, you might have to pull them into small groups later to do something more explicit or help them through that process during tier 2 instruction, or maybe even tier 3 instruction. Kids that are very far below the grade level norm, they might need skills that you're not teaching anymore in 3rd grade. Like maybe they don't know their letter sounds, and 3rd grade doesn't cover that anymore, so you're going to have to pull those tier 3 kids with a plan for them. So have a plan for your tier 2 learners and your tier 3 learners, and that's one form of differentiation. You can differentiate in a lot of ways. Some students are language learners. You can use help them translate some of the activities depending on your dual language or your bilingual model. Of course, some kids will need a text-to-speech, hearing impaired. There's so many ways to differentiate for kids, but you do need to build that into your plan ahead of time, okay? You have to have a plan because everybody's not on the same level. So the point of differentiation is to make sure that every student is working in what's the zone of proximal development, which means they're right there where they are learning, they're learning something new and it's challenging, but it's not so challenging that they're frustrated. Then you've gone too far and they're gonna quit. They might give up on you. Unless you're giving them some kind of, it's a game or it's something that's pushing them higher, you've got some kind of fuel, right? You can watch my videos on building an effective culture to learn how you can push the rigor even higher with positivity in games and things like that. But that zone of proximal development is where the student is learning at a high level, but not the frustrational level. And it's also called the productive struggle. So there should be a productive struggle. It shouldn't be so easy that they didn't really learn anything, or they learned something so tiny that it was not even worth their time almost, right? And it shouldn't be so hard that they're crying or they're stuck or they have no clue what you're doing. That's not a good place either. So the ideal is to have every student in your room at exactly their level of proximal development. Every student is having a productive struggle, but not a bad time. Okay, so and that usually takes a lot of years to perfect. But if you're focusing on doing that, you can do it your first year. You can do it within a couple of months. You just have to be very aware of where each student is, and just remember, if that's too easy, up the rigor. If it's too hard, lower the rigor a little bit. And there's a lot of strategies that you could use to do that. Number 7 is questioning strategies. Okay, make sure the questions that you're asking, that you're working in questions that are at a high level of rigor and that match or exceed the level of rigor of whatever their summative assessment is going to be. Okay, you can borrow stems from that assessment. You can make up your own stems, but sometimes teachers are not really cognizant of the kind of level of questions they're asking in class. A good idea would be to record yourself teaching a lesson and see what are you actually asking the students. You know, I've observed lessons where they're teaching kind of a high level math skill, but they're working it out, but all they stop and ask is, okay, so what's 4 divided by 2? 2, right, blah, blah, blah. So that's not what they're teaching, but they're throwing them out some very simple level, low level questions. Okay, so be very aware of what your questions are. Make sure you're asking higher level questions. Make sure you're asking open-ended questions, application questions, things that are challenging your students to really get into the content. Don't just think to yourself, oh, I'm going to ask some high-level questions today. You actually need to get your lesson plan for tomorrow, and look through that plan and write in what kind of questions are you going to ask and when, and how are you going to deliver those questions. If you're just asking the question and somebody's going to blurt it out, you're lowering the rigor a lot because you're not turning that into a multiple response strategy. So make sure on those really good questions that you've planned in, you give every student a chance to grapple with that question by having them write it on a whiteboard or maybe on their notebook or maybe a clicker or something like that, where they have a chance to every student to grapple with that higher level question, because otherwise you're really just doing that for 1 or 2 kids in your class, which is not it's not rigorous overall. Tip number 8 is make sure whatever you're doing is student-centered. Everything in your classroom should be student-centered. The more they can do without you, the better. The more independent you make them, the better. A lot of times teachers think admin is coming in to watch them. Sometimes they are, but the focus should not be on what the teacher is doing and what the teacher is saying. If you really know what you're looking for, we're watching the students to see what are the students doing, what are the students saying, because it's not how well you're teaching, it's how much the students are learning while you're in there facilitating. It's great if you're using the academic vocabulary, you should be, but have you built in a way to make sure the students are using academic vocabulary? Do you have some stems where they're using that? When they do a turn and talk, are they saying like things and stuff, or are they saying specific vocabulary for your content? Grading can become student-centered. Instead of you turn in your papers and I grade it all, which is not only exhausting, but it's not as good for the students. Make a rubric, give the students a rubric. Let them analyze their own work. Let them grade their own. Maybe they switch with their friend and they analyze their peers' work. All of this is student-centered. When you found a mistake in your grading, you could use a show call where you take a student's paper and you show as a good example, or sometimes a mistake. Just make sure the kids are okay with that, right? You maybe don't want to say whose paper that is, but you can hold up an actual student sample and show how to correct certain things. All of those things make it focused on the student. The students are making the effort and you are the facilitator. It's not about, you can stand there and talk all day long and they might not get a thing. You have to build in the student capacity. What are they doing while you're talking? What are they writing while you're writing? And who's spending all the effort in the classroom? Is it you or is it the students? It should be the students. Okay, tip number 9 is taxonomy. You've probably heard of Bloom's taxonomy. frequently in your education courses, but it's about raising the level of rigor in tasks. So memorization, that's a pretty low level of rigor. Copying something, that's a low level of rigor, right? But when you start to have the students being creative, so pay attention to the verbs. What is it we expect the students to be able to do? Are they supposed to just recall, or are they supposed to apply? There's a lot of different levels depending on how you use those verbs in your objective. There's a lot of nuance that can make a huge difference in the level of rigor that you might put in your objective that you're writing at the beginning of class. You can raise the level of rigor when you use graphics or thinking maps, graphic organizers, things like that. Those are including spatial, you start to get spatial and visual effects going on when you use a multi-sensory teaching approach, especially with the little ones. They're learning syllables, they're doing it on their fingers, or they're sounding it out, they're feeling the letters in their mouth, and all of those things help students learn more, and you're able to raise the rigor when you hit them with more than one modality. One of the best ways of raising rigor in your classroom is to include more writing, no matter what subject you teach, because writing makes you actually formulate. It's the same reason why teaching someone else helps you know it better, because now it's coming out of you and you're starting to actually explain what it is you know about something. Just a quick write, a little 5-minute writing, that is going to raise the rigor infinitely in your classroom, because now they're not memorizing, they're not just copying, but they are having to apply and create, and it's a very high level of rigor whenever they are writing about something that they know. And it's automatically differentiated, because if you're not such a good writer, you're only going to squeeze out maybe a sentence or two. But if you are an expert writer, you're going to be able to write multiple paragraphs, and you're going to have more advanced vocabulary and sentence structure. So it's automatically differentiated because each student is going to produce what they're able to do. Finally, number 10, it is probably the most important thing that you will do during your delivery, and it is monitoring and adjusting your instruction. Okay, it's very important that as you're teaching all day, and it's not something you're going to do once per lesson. You have to constantly be monitoring the class. Sometimes it's called aggressive monitoring or purposeful monitoring, setting the pathway. But whenever you set the students to do something, you can't just say, okay guys, now do that, and then go stand over here and organize something, or go sit at your desk. You have got to then walk around the room and make sure everybody is doing what they're supposed to do and that they're not lost, okay? And normally you'll start with your high kids, because they're going to pick it up. If they're stuck, then you can get them on track real quickly. You don't want them sitting there waiting. And then you move it out to the ones that are going to struggle, so that you can spend more time with them. I'll be talking about systems for building rigor in the next video. But for now, you just need to make sure that you monitor and adjust whenever you take a look around, and you slow down your pacing, you clarify a misconception, or you're responding to data that you've taken in the moment. So you're walking around, you think they got it, but you notice that 5 or 6 kids did not get that and they're struggling. So you might have to pause, stop the class, everybody eyes on me, and you're going to go ahead and reteach that misconception on the spot. So monitoring and adjusting is one of the skills that sometimes takes a long time for people to master in teaching. It can take many years, and every year you get better and better. Some people maybe are more naturally attuned to that. Some people who are empathetic, and they can feel and see when the students are lost. But it's one of the most powerful things you can do to be constantly improving your practice. If this video has added any value, please click the thumbs up and subscribe to be notified of future videos. Drop a comment below if there's any video you would like to see that has to do with teaching. And please look for part 4, systems needed for rigor in your high-risk classroom.